Hey everybody, it's Anna. So welcome to my reflections on the story of Bartimaeus, which was featured in the children's moment in this last week Sunday. So I want to share that I'm not gonna try to do live streams anymore because they're a little bit. I feel pressure during live streams because basically I'm sort of sharing my perspectives, and then people are bringing me their cards, and I don't mind reading the cards. It's more like I know there's like people backed up waiting for me. And I feel like I get very nervous about it. So I want to try instead is I'm going to offer this reflection, and I'm going to attach a spread to it or suggest a spread, which you can do on your own. But also, if you want to give me your cards, you can put them in the comments, and I will record a response to you right there in the comments. So I still want to respond, but I don't want to feel like people are waiting on me. Like, oh, when's she going to get through with these spreads and gets to mine? So anyway, in the comments below, I'm going to have the spread suggested. You can do it on your own. If you want to then follow up with giving me the spread you pull, I will respond as best I can, and we'll see how that goes. So I wanted to share how this past Sunday for the season of Lent, I am doing the children's moment in our church worship service, and I'm using the program called Worship and Wonder, which is this excellent, beautiful, contemplative program that I've worked with for several years in other churches. So basically, it's a story that you tell in a very deliberate, worshipful way. It's just really lovely and it's magical, I think. But the story this past Sunday was about Bartimaeus. So Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem. That's the season of Lent. Jesus is on the way to Jerusalem. And Bartimaeus is a blind man begging outside the city gates of Jericho. Jesus passes by. Bartimaeus hears that he's passing by and shouts, "Jesus, help me," right? And the crowd tries to shush him, but Bartimaeus just yells louder, right? "Jesus, help me." So Jesus hears them and invites them to bring Bartimaeus to him. And then Jesus asks, "What do you want?" And Bartimaeus says, "I want to see." And Jesus says, "Receive your sight." So I love this healing story because it has really important elements to it, I think. First of all, Bartimaeus is desperate because even though the crowd is telling him to be quiet and he's getting, picked on by the crowd, it doesn't matter. He's even potentially maybe in some danger because the crowd feels like he's being disruptive, and crowds are a little dangerous. They can be dangerous, especially if they think he's going to be some kind of nuisance. So he's not seen as very valuable. He's a beggar. So it's easy for them to treat him like he's not a human being. In spite of that, he draws more attention to himself. He actually disrupts. So there's a desperation here. There's a point at which something needs to change for him, right? Or he would just go about his business being a beggar, which he's been doing probably maybe his whole life. Jesus hears and calls him to him. So Jesus asks the question, "What do you want?" Jesus doesn't presume that he knows what the healing looks like. If he's asking Bartimaeus to claim it out loud, what does he want? So Bartimaeus tells him, "I want to see." And Jesus doesn't say, "Well, I give you your sight. I restore your sight. I heal your sight." Jesus says, "Receive your sight." It's as though the sight is right there and Bartimaeus only has to open up to it. And I think there's something really powerful about that as my own experience of healing, that, there's elements there that are really important, that are easy to miss if you think of healing as a linear path. Which is basically like, got a problem, find the solution, apply the solution. That's more of a linear understanding of healing. My experience of healing is divine intervention. It's miraculous. It's everything shifts, right? That is my regular experience of healing with myself and with other people. So anyway, Clint was telling the story. My husband was telling the story during his sermon about when Sandy Hook happened. He was talking about me and how when Sandy Hook happened, I had very small children. And he said when he heard it, his response was confusion and overwhelm. But when I heard it, he said, a dark cloud just seemed to come over Anna. And he said, it was like I was deeply, deeply wounded. And I was. For the whole day, I was just almost oppressed by this horrible feeling of sadness and pain. And really, by the end of the day, I was sort of pressed to the ground with it. So my husband's telling the story, and he's saying, Well, she struggled for a couple days. It wasn't a couple days, it was one day, because after one day I was done. But he remembered it differently. After a couple days, he said, God, he didn't say rebuked me, but it felt like God straightened me out and said, those children are safe. They're in my hands. You focus on your own children. Okay. So that's not a bad interpretation of my experience, but it's not at all accurate to my experience. And I told him later, like, that was not my story. So the way he tells it is like, I'm in a struggle. God kind of steps in and says, hey, refocus your attention, right? Like, don't focus on this. I've got these children handled, these families handled. You refocus. So it's more of a linear shifting of the mind from one focus to another focus, which, by the way, is how a lot of linear people probably do experience healing. They shift their focus from one thing to another. I'm not saying that can't be healing. I'm just saying that's not my experience of healing. So my experience of it was I was completely at my end. I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed. And I was laying in the floor of my son's room. My son was in a crib. And I was laying in the floor. And I just sat there and I thought, I can't go on. I can't go on. And I felt this break-in of peace saying, okay, let go of this. I'm going to take this away from you. Now you focus your love on your children. So what Clint was saying was true. But the healing wasn't that I shifted my own focus from one thing to another. It was that this inbreaking of peace came, and the burden was lifted and it was released. And then the instruction was, now get up and take care of your children. You've got work to do. Take care of your children. And I was freed up to do that. So my experience of healing is not from a perspective of agency. It's not a choice you are making. Like, oh, you're going to choose to be happy. You're going to choose to be grateful. So many times my clients come to me and that's what they communicate. I know I should be happy. I should be grateful. I should focus my attention. And I'm not saying that can't work for some people. But I'm saying for people who come to me, that doesn't work, because you have to gaslight yourself to pull that off. You are still in pain, but you're going to ignore the pain and focus on something else. So what I'm saying is the work of healing, in my experience and with my clients, is you come to the end of yourself. You come to the end of what you're capable of. And your mind finally realizes that it is hopeless to try to continue this way, right? You're at the end of what you can accomplish, and the mind surrenders. So it's not that the mind finally hits on the right solution or the right idea and shifts. The mind goes, I'm at a loss. And it's interesting to me. I say this to a lot of my new clients. A good many of my clients come to me when they're at that point. Their mind is like, I've tried everything. I always say my clients are not slouches. They've done everything they can come up with. They've done counseling. They've tried different careers. They've done this. They've changed relationships. They've changed places of employment. They've changed where they lived. Like, they have done everything they could come up with to solve this awful aching inside of themselves. And none of it worked. And their mind is finally at a point of surrender. And it's at the point of surrender where the mind releases and says, I'm ready for something else, right? I need to find, there is no way forward if I don't have some kind of miraculous intervention. So I pulled this card today because it's the Five of Pentacles, which I love. The Five of Pentacles is the challenge of the Pentacles, right? It's the challenge of the Pentacles realm, which is the physical realm. And it is a card about poverty and struggle. These two people are in the snow. One is on crutches. They're barefoot. they're in a desperate state of struggle, right? So the challenge of the five is are you ready to be helped? Okay, because in the background you've got this stained glass window, and that is represents a church, right? Which means these people are walking by a sanctuary. If they are ready to give up on trying to move forward, so right now they've got their eyes are focused on their feet. And actually, they don't see the sanctuary yet. Right? They don't see it yet because they're focusing on taking their next steps. They're focusing on pushing through, right? They're going to solve this themselves. If they are determined to continue this way, they won't see the church, which means they're not quite ready for the miraculous intervention that's being offered to them. By the way, there's no problem with that. Okay, it's not like they're being stubborn. They just don't see it yet. It's like Bartimaeus. He's not blind because he's stubborn. He's blind because he can't see yet, right? The question is, are they desperate enough to get, if, for example, if they stopped in their tracks and throw up their hands and say, we're stuck. If they give up, they'll see it. They'll see it. Okay. So the challenge here is not just, can you see it? That is part of it. I think there is your desperation, your hopelessness pushes you to the point that you finally look somewhere else for help, right? The other question is, are they willing to receive this help? Because that's another piece. If they, you also have to believe, well, okay, if you're desperate, you're almost like, well, what do I have to lose, right? Like, okay, maybe these people in this church are not good people, but what do I have to lose? There is that feeling of what do I have to lose, right? And I'll say that to my clients, like, well, if it doesn't work, what have you lost? And they're like, yeah, what have I lost, right? If you try this intervention, this healing, it doesn't work, then you're back where you started, right? So there is sort of a sense of, it can't get worse than this. How about that? It can't get worse. When I was laying in the floor of my son's room, it couldn't get worse. I was not functional any longer. It can't get worse, right? So if it can't get worse, and you look around and there's an option, because it can't get worse, your mind has given up on the idea that it can make anything better, you'll take the option. And of course, the option is of healing and miraculous, and the divine intervention and miraculous intervention is that you discover you are safe and you are loved. That is always what happens. I can speak from my own experience. It never doesn't happen. That when people get to this point of desperation and they're ready to ask for help, that help doesn't come. I will say the scary thing about the 5, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge. The scary thing about it is the mind can make the other shift, which is, it can't get worse. Let's get off the planet. And most of my clients, including me, have had that feeling. Well, either something has to change or I'm not staying on the planet any longer. So there's something kind of, the Chinese word for crisis is dangerous opportunity. There's something dangerous in this opportunity, right? That you might just fall in your tracks and not look up again, right? And die in the snow. So, but I think there is something in us that's here to do something, and it does call out into the deep, right? It does call out, and I would say, if you call out to the deep, if you call out to the mystery, and your mind is not terribly, really, really stuck, then there is that shift. There is that possibility. Clint also talked about the story of Job, which is in the Hebrew text. And Job, the story of Job is that, he's this very wealthy person, has a great family. And then one by one, all of his blessings are taken away from him. His children are killed. He's struck down with, all of his fortunes are gone. And he's struck down with a terrible disease. And so the whole book of Job is sort of is him struggling with the question of, why is this happening to me, right? Why do good things happen to bad? Why do bad things happen to good people? Which is the challenge of theodicy, which is theology. If you look at theological systems, they're always struggling with theodicy, right? So he's in there. He's got his friends around him. They're all struggling, right? Struggling with this. Finally, Job addresses God and says, I want to talk to you face to face. He's like, I am ready to take you on. You're treating me unjustly. He's accusing God of being unfair, which, by the way, that's good. That's good stuff. People say you shouldn't, be mad at God. Don't yell. No, yell at God. There's Psalms full of people yelling at God. Yelling at God, yelling at the universe is engagement. It is passion. It is connection. It is the fight for life. Okay, so he challenges God. Says, where are you? Where have you been? So God finally speaks at the very end, the last few chapters of Job. God speaks, and basically God shows Job God's glory and all the connections, all the beauty, all the mystery that God has created. So the way Clint read it, because Clint's a linear guy, he's all right, he's a linear guy. He says, basically, it's almost like God rebukes Job. Well, who do you think you are? I'm God, right? That's not how I read it. I read it as Job's profound struggle is that he feels abandoned, alone, isolated. That is the feeling here, right? There is no hope for us. Nobody loves us. We are not valuable. Why should we struggle, right? Job is afraid that God has abandoned him. He is afraid that God is not loving him. So his profound challenge, he finally shakes his fist at God. Basically says, you're wrong, God. You're wrong. I am valuable. That's the fight, right? It's not true that I have no value. There is beauty, there's power, there's possibility in me, and I'm not willing to abandon it, right? So finally, Job shakes his fist at God, and God speaks and says, God does say, where were you when I laid out the foundations of the earth? Where were you? So it does sound like a rebuke, but I don't think it's a rebuke. I think God is saying, all of this I created, and here you are in the middle of it. I have never lost you. You have never not been mine. You are mine. And I think that profound moment of connection, of being loved, of being acknowledged, of being part of the whole is that feeling of deliverance that I felt in the floor of my son's bedroom when I was sunk into the abyss and suddenly I was lifted. No, you don't belong in the abyss. I'm pulling you out. You are not broken and hopeless. You are divine and powerful. So I think that's how I read Job. And so Job hears the voice of God and says, I spoke without realizing. Now I see. Now I see, right? It's the same theme of Bartimaeus. I didn't see, but now I see, right? So it's interesting because I just got an email this morning from Bridget over at Biddy Tarot, which is where I learned the tarot. And she's doing this Zoom live stream for the eclipse, which is coming up in a few days, the lunar eclipse. I should read it more carefully. Basically, she was saying the eclipse is an opportunity to stir things up, right? And she talked a lot about seeing. What are we seeing? What's being revealed? What is hidden? What is revealed? So I love the idea of what is hidden from us at the moment of our healing. What is hidden is our belovedness. We don't see it right now. We feel hopeless and lost, but there's that, it's hidden, right? And the question is, what do you want? I want to see it, right? That's the moment where we advocate for our healing. Not because we can make it happen, but because we are ready to submit ourselves to the force, the divine force outside of ourselves, within ourselves, that can remove the cloud and show us what's true. And once we see what's true, that we've never been abandoned, we are deeply beloved, we are deeply held, that healing opens up new opportunities. I will say that when you do a lot of healing, the longer you do this work, right, it becomes less necessary for you to get into terribly, terribly dire straits. I mean, you're not just happening to walk and you see the sanctuary. You're now plotting your path to look for sanctuaries. You're gonna create a path in which you're constantly engaging sanctuaries. Because at some point your mind realizes, this is a lot easier. It is a lot easier to not be independent, to not require myself to problem solve. It is a lot easier to live as the fool, at least, in the full energy, and let myself be loved and rescued all the time. I'm going to look for rescue. I'm going to wait for it. I'm going to make my life dependent. My whole life relies on being in the position of the fool. So which means, you're less and less guarding yourself, protecting yourself, planning, you're less and less strategizing, you're more and more following this magical path. So, but again, that comes over time. So this very dramatic experience of healing, happens because the mind almost has to see something it can't see yet. Once the mind begins to see what's possible and recognize this alternative understanding of who you are, it does adapt to it. My mind is often complaining to me. I talk about being naked and unarmed in the world. My mind, a few years ago, my mind was like, well, now we're naked and unarmed. All of my weapons are gone. I'm just naked in the world. And the mind's like, oh, I have no way to protect us. Yeah, that actually ends up being what happens. You don't put any more energy into protecting yourself because you don't have to, because you're beloved. So it is sort of this ongoing path. The longer you do it, the more healing becomes a part of the way you do things. It doesn't become this surprising shock anymore. It becomes the way you do things, which is really lovely. That becomes your new way of life. It's very challenging. Everything is challenging, okay? There's no life that isn't challenging, but at least your mind now begins to agree to the premise that you aren't the despondent one that's unloved. It begins to believe that you are loved, that the divine is available, and that it has a vested interest in your well-being. So that's my talk today. So the 3-card spread I'm going to pull. I'm not going to pull it right now, but I'm going to suggest it for you. And I might pull it later, like, and put it in the comments if I pull my own spread. But I'm going to have 3 questions. One is, what is it we want to see? What is it we're not seeing? What is like the blindness? What is it we are not seeing? And the second question would be, why might we not want to see it? Right? Like what scares us about that? And the third question would be, how do we agree to seeing? Those 3 questions. So feel free to use that spread yourself and do your own reflections. If you want to share in the comments what the spread comes up for you, you can. Feel free to pull your spread and send it to me in the comments. I plan to like do video responses. I think that'll be kind of cool. And that way people can look at the responses if they want. And if they don't want to, they can skip over and find their own. But and that way you won't feel like people are waiting for me to hurry up and get to their spread. And then of course, if you want to email me, you can email my emails in the comments and we can do it private. I can do it privately for you. So, all right. Well, that's my thoughts for this day in Lent. I will see you next time.